Have you ever been late to class with an excuse so bizarre that no one believed you, but it was actually true? Maybe you got stuck in a freak accident. Maybe you found yourself in the middle of a crime scene. Or maybe, just maybe, something so insane happened that even you had a hard time believing it. Well, you're not alone. Today, Reddit True Vault brings you 20 of the wildest, most unbelievable reasons students have shown up late to school. And guess what? Every single one of them is 100% real. From a high-speed police chase to a near-death escape from a burning school bus, from a student hunting down a thief like an action movie hero to a terrifying armed robbery, these aren't just ordinary late excuses. They're the kind of stories that leave teachers speechless, principals baffled, and classmates in complete shock. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single one. So sit back, stay tuned, and if you love these crazy true stories, don't forget to subscribe to Reddit True Vault for more unbelievable tales every week. Now let's dive in. First up, imagine telling your teacher that your school bus literally exploded on your way to class, only to have them laugh in your face. Well, that's exactly what happened to a group of students until the entire school saw the breaking news. Story 1. Our school bus exploded, and no one believed us. You ever show up late to school with an excuse so insane that nobody believes you? Yeah, that happened to me. Except, it wasn't an excuse. It was the truth. I was on the morning bus with about 20 other kids, half asleep, earbuds in, when it happened. 1 second, everything was normal. The next, boom, the entire bus shook. A deafening blast threw us forward as flames erupted behind us. The emergency exit blew open. Black smoke filled the air, and the driver screamed, "Get out." Now, I don't even remember jumping. 1 second I was in my seat. The next I was rolling on the pavement, scraping my knees, coughing, eyes burning from the smoke. Some kids were crying. Some were frozen in shock. Someone had lost their backpack in the fire. The whole bus was engulfed in flames. We ran. By the time firefighters got there was nothing left but a charred metal skeleton. Shaken, bruised, covered in soot. We finally made it to school nearly an hour late. And you know what happened when we walked into the office? They laughed. "Oh, come on." Ms. Carter, the school disciplinarian, scoffed, eyeing our burnt-up clothes. "What excuse do you have this time?" We all looked at each other. Finally, Ethan, still catching his breath, spoke. "Our school bus exploded." Silence. Then laughter. The teachers smirked, the vice principal chuckled, and Ms. Carter just shook her head. "Right. And I suppose aliens beamed you down here too." Then someone screamed. Ms. Reynolds, the office secretary, had gone pale. She was staring at her computer screen, eyes wide, hand over her mouth. We turned, and there it was, breaking news. School bus erupts in massive explosion. Students miraculously escape. The image? A smoking, melted wreck of what used to be our bus. Miss Carter dropped her clipboard. The vice principal turned ghost white. Nobody laughed after that. For the rest of the year, every time someone showed up late, the teachers only had one question. Was it another explosion? And they were only half joking. But not all near-death experiences happened on a school bus. Story 2. The shop teacher's near-death experience. I never thought a stupid prank could nearly cost someone their life. But that's exactly what happened. Mr. Carter was our high school shop teacher. Tough, but fair. He always drilled the importance of responsibility into us, saying, "When you work with machines, carelessness can get people hurt." I guess Jason, one of my classmates, didn't take that lesson seriously. One afternoon in the shop, we were going over basic car maintenance. Mr. Carter had parked his truck outside, and Jason, thinking he was being funny, decided to mess with it. While the rest of us were cleaning up, he crouched by the front tire and loosened the lug nuts. "Just a little joke," he whispered, smirking. None of us thought much of it, until the next morning. Mr. Carter didn't show up for first period. Instead, the principal did. His face was pale. Mr. Carter had been driving on the highway when his front wheel completely detached. The truck veered off course, skidding toward oncoming traffic before slamming into the median. By some miracle, he wasn't seriously injured, but the cops knew someone had tampered with his car. It didn't take long for Jason's name to come up. He was suspended on the spot. There was even talk of criminal charges. After that day, shop class felt different. Mr. Carter still taught, but there was a new rule. You don't touch what isn't yours. Ever. And trust me, no one ever forgot it. But sometimes, being late isn't about bad decisions or reckless pranks. It's just pure, unavoidable fate. Story 3. The funeral procession that saved me. Professor Caldwell had one rule. If you were late to his class, you weren't getting in, unless you had a funeral as an excuse. No other reasons, he'd say every semester. If you're late, it better be because you were in a funeral procession. I never thought I'd need to use that rule. Until one rainy Tuesday morning. I was running late, already pushing it on time, when traffic suddenly slowed to a crawl. Then it stopped. I groaned, gripping the steering wheel. That's when I saw them, rows of cars with their headlights on, a hearse leading the way, a funeral procession. And it was never ending. I checked the clock. 5 minutes left. No way I was making it. Then it hit me. I grabbed my phone and started recording, getting clear shots of the hearse, the seemingly infinite line of cars, and even a street sign proving where I was. By the time I reached campus, the door to the lecture hall was already closed. I knocked, knowing exactly what was coming. Professor Caldwell swung it open, already shaking his head. I didn't say a word, just held up my phone. He stared at the video. Silence. Then, for the first time, he laughed. Well, he said, stepping aside. Guess you win this time. Some excuses are so unbelievable that they become legendary. But what if your excuse isn't just about being late, but about catching a criminal? That's exactly what happened to one student who turned a stolen laptop into a full-blown federal investigation. Story 4. The paper, the thief, and the Taco Bell chase. I've been a college professor for over 20 years, and in that time, I've heard every excuse imaginable. From my dog ate my homework, to a hacker deleted my essay, I've mastered the art of nodding politely while mentally docking points. So, when Logan Hayes walked into my office, looking like he hadn't slept in days, I was already preparing to reject whatever excuse he was about to drop. My laptop was stolen, he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. It had my term paper on it. I sighed, motioning to the stack of late assignments on my desk. Logan, I can't pass every student who claims a computer mishap. He hesitated, then leaned in. I'm not asking for a pass. I'm asking for an extension, because I tracked down the guy who stole it. Now he had my attention. As Logan recounted the story, I found myself leaning forward. A break-in. A missing safe. His older brother, a former Marine, deciding they weren't waiting for the police. Logan and Dean spent nights patrolling sketchy motels and pawn shops, gathering intel like private detectives. Then came the tip-off. The thief's van was spotted outside a Taco Bell. The brothers staked it out, watching him make a sloppy, greasy meal run. Just as he returned to his van, they blocked him in and called the cops. Here's where the story took a wild turn. When the police searched the van, they found stacks of counterfeit bills, printing equipment, and enough evidence to trigger a federal investigation. Secret Service agents got involved. The guy wasn't just a petty thief. He was a full-scale criminal operation on wheels. And Logan? He got his laptop back, paper still intact. By the time he finished, I was speechless. You expect me to believe all that? I finally asked. He pulled out his phone and showed me the news article. There it was. His name. His brother's name. The arrest. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. Well, Logan, I think you've just earned yourself an A. But not every bad decision leads to a Secret Service investigation. Some just leave you covered in mud. Story 5. The shortcut that ruined my life. I swear, it seemed like a good idea at the time. It was pouring that morning, and I was already running late. The school bell was minutes away from ringing, and I had two choices. 1. Walk the long way around like a law-abiding citizen. 2. Take this shortcut through the empty lot behind the gym. Like any genius teenager who values 5 extra minutes of sleep over personal safety, I went with option 2. Big mistake. The shortcut was now a full-blown swamp. One step in, and my foot disappeared into ankle-deep mud. The second step? Knee-deep. The third? I wasn't even walking anymore. I was swimming in filth. I struggled like a man fighting quicksand in a bad action movie, each attempt to pull myself free only making things worse. My backpack? Gone. My dignity? Also gone. By the time I escaped, I looked like I had just wrestled a swamp monster and lost. When I finally staggered into class, dripping wet, covered in mud, and smelling like disappointment, my teacher, Mrs. Thompson, stopped mid-lecture. The entire room fell silent. All eyes on me. She blinked. Ethan, what happened? I sighed, slumped into my chair, and uttered the only words that made sense. I took a shortcut. The class erupted. Laughter, wheezing. Someone actually fell out of their chair. By lunchtime, the whole school knew. For the rest of the year, every minor inconvenience, every bad decision, every questionable life choice, all answered with a shrug and those now legendary words. I took a shortcut, but sometimes being late isn't just about bad luck or poor choices. Sometimes It's about witnessing something that changes everything. Story 6. The Hit and Run Witness. I wasn't even late that morning. For once, I was actually on time, strolling up to the school entrance, half awake and clutching my usual gas station coffee. Then, out of nowhere, bam, a sickening thud, the sound of metal slamming into flesh. I turned just in time to see a man tumble over the hood of a car before crashing onto the pavement. The car hesitated for half a second, then sped off. My heart pounded as I sprinted forward, dropping my coffee in the process. "Sir, can you hear me?" He groaned, clutching his leg. A few other students rushed over, someone already calling 911. The guy was alive, but barely. And then, as I looked up to get a better view of the car, my stomach dropped. I knew that car. 15 minutes later, as the police arrived and started taking statements, I sat in stunned silence, watching the same car pull into the school parking lot, completely unfazed. And stepping out of the driver's seat, Brian Thompson, a guy from my first period class. He strolled inside like it was just another Monday morning, like he hadn't just left someone bleeding out on the street. Long story short, the cops didn't take long to put two and two together. Brian was escorted out of school in handcuffs before the first bell even rang. And me? I still got marked late. If getting caught in a hit and run wasn't shocking enough, our next story proves that some people have an unshakable dedication to their jobs, even after staring down the barrel of a gun. Story 7. Held at gunpoint and still showed up for work. I always thought I was a pretty tough guy. You know, the type who doesn't let anything shake him. But that night changed everything. It was supposed to be a quick stop at the gas station after dinner. I grabbed a bottle of water, paid, and stepped outside, straight into a gun, wallet, phone. Now, the guy was shaking, nervous. That was worse than if he had been calm. Calm meant control. Shaking meant unpredictability. My heart pounded as I raised my hands. "Okay, man, just take it." He snatched my stuff and ran. It was over in seconds, but my legs felt like they'd turned to stone. The clerk called the cops. Next thing I knew, I was sitting in the back of a squad car, answering questions, watching security footage on loop like it was some bad movie. By the time I got home, it was nearly 4 a.m. I should have called out of work. Any sane person would have. But instead, I crashed for a few hours, then dragged myself out of bed, showered, changed, and somehow made it to the office. Only an hour late for my 9 a.m. shift. My boss, Mr. Reynolds, looked up as I walked in, bleary-eyed and still running on pure adrenaline. "Rough morning." "Yeah," I muttered, dropping into my chair. "What happened?" I sighed. "Got held at gunpoint last night." He blinked. "And you still came in?" I shrugged. Didn't want to use a sick day. For the first time in my life, I saw my boss genuinely speechless. But sometimes, being late isn't about bad luck or reckless choices. It's about watching fate crush your last shred of hope right in front of you. Story 8. Glasses on the road. In a truck with no mercy. I knew something was wrong the moment Ethan walked into the classroom. For starters, he was late. Ethan was never late. He was the kind of guy who showed up 10 minutes early just to stress about being late. But today, he stumbled through the door like he had just escaped from a maze, his hands slightly stretched out in front of him, his eyes squinting at everything like he was trying to solve a puzzle no one else could see. The second clue? He walked straight into Mr. Reynolds' desk. The entire class went silent. Ethan muttered something under his breath, straightened up, and slowly turned toward the front of the room. "Rough morning?" Mr. Reynolds asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan let out a long sigh. "You have no idea." That's when I noticed he wasn't wearing his glasses. Apparently, on his way to school, a freak gust of wind had ripped them right off his face. Before he could grab them, they landed in the middle of the road. And just as he reached down to pick them up, bam, a semi-truck flattened them like a pancake. So there he was, basically blind, forced to navigate 5 blocks to school by memory alone. And according to him, it did not go well. He tripped over a curb, mistook a parked car for a person, and apologized to it. Almost stepped into traffic, and my personal favorite, walked straight into a mailbox. By the time he got to school, his confidence and his dignity were both in pieces, just like his glasses. Needless to say, Ethan spent the rest of the day sitting at his desk, arms crossed, refusing to speak to anyone. The next day, he showed up with not one, but 2 pairs of backup glasses. Lesson learned. But sometimes, showing up late isn't just about bad luck. It's about survival. Story 9. The morning I had to run for my life. It was just another quiet morning for Mr. Henderson, the history teacher. He had barely taken attendance when the classroom door burst open. Every head turned. Standing there, dripping wet, clothes clinging to his frame, was Alex Carter. His chest heaved like he had just run a marathon. Water pooled beneath his sneakers, and strands of his hair stuck to his forehead. Mr. Henderson blinked. Alex. Before he could even ask, Alex held up a shaking hand. There was a guy. He swallowed hard. Following me. I had to go through the river to get away. Silence. A few students snickered. Someone muttered, "Yeah, sure." But Mr. Henderson didn't laugh. The way Alex's hands trembled, the wild panic still in his eyes. This wasn't some kid making up an excuse. He gestured for Alex to sit. Take a breath. Then he turned to the class, his tone sharper. Someone get the nurse. Now, as Alex sat down, shivering, Mr. Henderson crouched beside him. Tell me everything. And as Alex recounted every chilling detail, the footsteps behind him, the way the man matched his pace, how he had no choice but to charge straight through the freezing river. Mr. Henderson felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a lie. And the worst part? Whoever had followed Alex that morning was still out there. Teachers hear all kinds of excuses, but some are so absurd that they don't even deserve a second thought, until reality proves them wrong. Story 10. The student who was always punished for lying, until the truth shocked everyone. Liam had a reputation. Not the cool kind, not the troublemaker kind, no. He was the kid who made things up. At least, that's what everyone, especially his English teacher, Mr. Holloway, thought. Excuses, excuses. Mr. Holloway would mutter every time Liam had a reason for missing an assignment or showing up late. Dog stole his homework. Please. Got stuck in an elevator? Highly unlikely. Witnessed a minor car accident? How convenient. So when Liam burst into class that morning, panting, clothes singed at the edges, and reeking of smoke, Mr. Holloway didn't even look up from his coffee. All right, let's hear it, he sighed. Did aliens abduct you? Or maybe you had to wrestle a bear on the way here. Liam, still gasping for breath, wiped soot from his cheek. No, sir. I pulled an old lady out of a burning house. The class erupted in laughter. Even the quiet kids in the back snickered. Mr. Holloway rolled his eyes. That's it. You're staying after class. Liam opened his mouth to protest. But what was the point? No one ever believed him. That night, though, everything changed. During the evening news, Mr. Holloway nearly dropped his fork when he saw the headline. Teen hero rescues elderly woman from house fire. Risked his own life to save hers. And there, on the screen, was Liam, looking a little nervous but undeniably real. The next morning, as he walked into class, a hush fell over the room. No laughter, no eye rolls, just silence. Mr. Holloway cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. Liam, I owe you an apology. For the first time ever, Liam smiled. Because, for once, he didn't have to explain himself. The truth had spoken for him. Some excuses for missing school are predictable. Sick days, family emergencies, alarm clocks that mysteriously fail. But then there are the rare, once-in-a-lifetime excuses that leave teachers utterly speechless. Story 11. The funniest excuse letter a teacher ever received. The Monday after an unexpected Saturday school session, Mr. Calloway, a history teacher at Lincoln High, sat at his desk sorting through late notes. Most were standard excuses, family emergencies, illnesses, forgotten alarms. But then he picked up a letter that made him pause. It was written in thick, bold handwriting on a crumpled piece of notebook paper. Dear Sir or Madam, my son ain't the brightest, but even he knows that you don't punish people for someone else's stupidity. He won't be in school today. I bought him a six-pack so he could get good and drunk. You all can deal with it. Have a blessed day. Mr. Calloway blinked. He read it again. Then, unable to help himself, he burst into laughter. The letter belonged to Jack, a junior known for his laid-back attitude and sarcastic wit. When he walked in, Mr. Calloway held up the note. Care to explain this? Jack just shrugged. My dad didn't think we should have had school on Saturday. So, he made a point. A few other teachers gathered around, reading over his shoulder. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others chuckled. Well, Mr. Calloway finally said, setting the letter down, I suppose your dad has a way with words. That note became legendary at Lincoln High. Passed around, whispered about, and even photocopied by teachers who needed a laugh. Another story follows, but this one isn't as lighthearted as the last. Story 12. The math teacher's final lesson. Mr. Holloway was not like other teachers. He was always late, sometimes disappearing in the middle of class without a word. The students whispered about it, trading theories. Maybe he had a secret life, maybe he just didn't care. Some joked that he was just lazy. But on that particular morning, something felt different. He entered the classroom later than usual, his posture stiff, his face unreadable. Instead of heading straight to the chalkboard, he just stood there, gripping the edge of his desk. The usual murmurs of the students faded into silence. "I know I've been late a lot," he said finally, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "And I owe you all an explanation." A pause. Then he exhaled sharply, as if forcing himself to say the words aloud. "I have cancer." A stunned silence filled the room. The air felt heavier, suffocating. Some students glanced at each other in disbelief. Others looked down, not knowing how to react. Mr. Holloway gave a small, tired smile. "I didn't want you to find out this way, but I won't be coming back after today." He placed a single piece of chalk on the desk, gave the class one last look, and walked out the door. He never came back. And just like that, the man everyone thought was simply unreliable became the teacher they would never forget. Some students will come up with the wildest excuses to get out of class. But then, there are those who will show up no matter what, even if they can't remember how they got there. Story 13. The student who forgot everything except his homework. I was halfway through my lecture on linear equations when the door creaked open. A student stumbled in, slightly disheveled, his eyes unfocused. It was Nathan, a solid student, but definitely not one to be late. "Nathan," I said, crossing my arms. "Care to explain where you've been for the last hour?" He blinked at me, swaying slightly before pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. I think I was at the hospital." A few students chuckled, but I frowned. Something about the way he was standing, the hesitation in his voice, it didn't feel like a joke. "Nathan," I said more gently, "are you okay?" He nodded slowly. I think so. I was in judo class this morning, and my partner threw me a little too hard. Hit my head. Doctor said I have. He squinted at the paper in his hand. Temporary memory loss?" Now the entire class was silent. "So let me get this straight," I said, trying to process. "You don't remember where you've been all morning, but you still came to class." Nathan scratched the back of his head. "Yeah, I figured I should be here." "Oh, and I still remember the homework." That was the moment I realized. Either this kid was the most dedicated student I'd ever met, or he had a concussion so bad he forgot how to skip class properly. Most students have been late because of traffic or a missed alarm. But for two unlucky classmates, their excuse sounded like something from a Wild West movie. Story 14. The train robbery that made us late. You ever walk into class late and just know, that whatever comes out of your mouth next is going to sound like the dumbest excuse in history? That was me and my friend Jordan, standing in the doorway of our second period history class, looking like we had just survived a war zone. Mr. Calloway raised an eyebrow. "You two are late." "Explain." Jordan and I exchanged a glance. We had rehearsed this in our heads 100 times on the way here, but now, with 20 pairs of eyes staring us down, it sounded ridiculous. "Our train got robbed," I finally said. Silence. Then laughter. Someone in the back whistled. Another kid muttered, "Creative. I'm stealing that one." Mr. Calloway sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Gentlemen," Jordan cut him off. "No, seriously. 3 guys with ski masks. Guns. The whole deal." I whipped out my phone and pulled up the news. Look, a giant breaking news banner flashed across the screen. "Armed robbery on city train. Suspects in custody." The laughing stopped. Mr. Calloway stared at the screen, then at us. "Wait, you were actually on that train?" Jordan nodded. "Yep," I exhaled. "So, do we still get detention, or?" Mr. Calloway blinked. Then, he burst out laughing. "Hell no. If anything, I should be giving you extra credit for surviving a train heist." The next story is also about traffic, but this time, it's a little unusual. Story 15. The most ironic car accident ever. Mr. Lawson had been teaching for nearly 20 years, and he thought he had heard every excuse for being late. Until today, the door burst open, and 2 students stumbled in, Jake Miller and Oliver Hayes. Their clothes were slightly disheveled, and both looked equally embarrassed and out of breath. Mr. Lawson sighed. "You're late." Jake nodded. "Yeah, we were in a car accident." Oliver pointed at Jake. With each other, the room fell silent for a beat, then erupted into laughter. Even Mr. Lawson had to fight back a smirk. He motioned for them to explain. Turns out, both boys lived in the same neighborhood and took the same road to school. Running late, neither of them had been paying close attention. Jake had been focused on adjusting his mirror, while Oliver was trying to grab a coffee cup tipping over in his passenger seat. Neither noticed the other until, BM, 2 bumpers met in the most ridiculous fender bender ever. Their cars were mostly fine. A few dents, a broken headlight, but nothing serious. So, naturally, instead of dealing with insurance or telling their parents, they just drove to school. Mr. Lawson pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly. Let me get this straight. You two hit each other. With your cars. And then just showed up to class. Jake shrugged. Well, yeah, Oliver grinned. We didn't want to be late. The class howled with laughter. Mr. Lawson shook his head, half amused, half exasperated. Just sit down, you two. And for the love of all things holy, pay attention when you drive. The next story isn't just shocking, it's downright chilling. Some excuses for being late are unbelievable, but this one? No one dared to question it. Story 16. The student who just escaped 9/11. I was sitting in class, lazily doodling in the margins of my notebook, when the door slammed open so hard it rattled the windows. Every head snapped toward the entrance. Jason stood there, panting, his face pale as a ghost. His clothes were wrinkled, his hands shaking. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. No, something worse. Dude, are you okay? Someone asked, half laughing. Jason didn't answer. He didn't even look at the teacher. Instead, he marched straight to the corner of the room where the old TV sat on a rolling cart. Without a word, he grabbed the remote, turned it on, and flipped through the channels. The laughter stopped. The image on the screen didn't make sense at first. A skyscraper, smoke pouring out of it. News anchors talking in panicked voices. Then, right in front of our eyes, another plane slammed into the second tower. Someone gasped. Someone else swore under their breath. Jason just stood there, staring at the screen, his breathing ragged. Finally, in a hoarse whisper, he said, I was right there. I saw it. No one said a word. No one laughed. For the first time in my life, I saw a classroom full of teenagers sit in complete, stunned silence. No one expects to see a classmate walk in looking like they just survived a horror movie. But that's exactly what happened next. Story 17. The student who walked into class covered in blood. How would you react if someone walked into your classroom looking like they had just committed a murder? I was sitting near the back of the lecture hall when it happened. Professor Grant was halfway through his economics lecture, droning on about market fluctuations, when the door creaked open. At first, no one really paid attention. People came in late all the time. But then the room went silent. Not the normal kind of silent. Not the zoned out and bored kind. This was the kind of silence that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I followed everyone's gaze to the door, and that's when I saw him. Daniel Harper. His shirt, his hands, even the sleeves of his jacket, completely soaked in red. The guy looked like he had just walked off a horror movie set. A girl up front let out a strangled gasp. Someone muttered, "What the hell?" Professor Grant, to his credit, kept his voice steady. "Daniel, are you okay?" Daniel blinked, looked down at himself. And then, in the most casual voice imaginable, he said, "Oh, right. I could hear someone fumbling for their phone, probably about to call 911. Meanwhile, Daniel just sighed, rubbing his forehead, which only smeared more blood across his face, and mumbled, "There was an accident. A car crash. I stopped to help." You could feel the room deflate. Professor Grant exhaled, running a hand down his face. "For God's sake, Harper, go clean yourself up before you traumatize your classmates." Daniel gave a sheepish nod and turned toward the door. But just as he was about to leave, he paused and looked back. "Oh, do I still need to turn in my paper today?" And that's when I lost it. The next story about being late is going to be a bit, how should I put it? It's honestly hard to imagine. Story 18. The arrest that no one saw coming. As the hallways emptied and students settled into their exam rooms, I, Mr. Dawson, the school hall monitor, made my usual rounds. The morning had been uneventful, just another standardized test day where nervous energy filled the air. Then I saw him. Jack Reynolds, usually one of the more punctual students, was stumbling down the hall, his steps uneven, face pale as a ghost. I barely recognized him. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something heavier. "Reynolds," I called out, stepping toward him. "You're late for your exam." He didn't respond, didn't even look at me, just kept walking toward the classroom, eyes unfocused. Something was wrong. I followed him in, and by the time I got there, Mr. Carter had already noticed. The entire class had gone silent, watching as Jack collapsed into his chair. His fingers trembled around his pencil, but he wasn't writing. "Jack?" Mr. Carter asked. "What's going on?" I expected an excuse about being stuck in traffic or oversleeping. But then, in a voice so quiet it barely reached me at the door, Jack whispered, "My dad was arrested this morning." The weight of his words crushed the room. Even I, a man who had dealt with troublemakers and emergencies for years, didn't know what to say. Mr. Carter offered Jack a way out. telling him he could step outside. And for the first time since I saw him in that hallway, Jack moved with certainty. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and left without another word. As I watched him walk away, I didn't stop him. What do you even say to a kid who just had his world flipped upside down? The next story is probably a memory that a devoted fan will never forget. Story 19. I skipped class to meet Lady Gaga. Look, I know skipping school is bad. I really do. But when Lady Gaga is making a surprise appearance at Macy's for a limited edition fragrance launch, yeah, school can wait. I left my house at 6 a.m., heart pounding, practically flying to the department store. When I got there, the line was already insane, hundreds of fans buzzing with excitement. For hours, I stood there, shifting on my feet, barely able to breathe. And then, suddenly, she was there. Lady freaking Gaga. I don't even remember how it happened. 1 second, I was in line. The next, I was standing in front of her, handing over my perfume box. She smiled at me. She spoke to me. And when she signed the box, I swear, I almost blacked out. By the time I got to school, I was running purely on adrenaline. I slipped into my seat, trying to act casual, like I hadn't just met a global icon. Mr. Calloway, my history teacher, barely looked up before saying, "Tyler, you're late. What's your excuse this time?" Still breathless, I held up my signed perfume box. "Sorry, Mr. Calloway. I was meeting Lady Gaga." The class erupted. Calloway just stared at me, then sighed, rubbing his temples. I really hope it was worth it. It absolutely was. And just when you think you've heard every possible excuse for being late, this next student walked into class dripping with evidence of her rebellion, literally. Story 20. The girl who walked into class with dripping blue hair. I knew it was a terrible idea, but at the time, it felt genius. It all started when I decided, on a complete whim, that my dark brown hair was boring. I wanted change. I wanted edge. And, most importantly, I wanted blue hair. So, naturally, I skipped the last 2 periods of school, biked over to my friend's house, and let her dye my hair in her bathroom sink. Halfway through, disaster struck. My mom called. "Where are you?" she demanded. "Studying." The silence on the other end of the line was terrifying. 10 minutes later, she was banging on my friend's front door. I barely had time to rinse before she dragged me, dripping wet, straight back to school. My hair was still soaking. The dye hadn't even set properly. I walked into class late, my damp, neon blue hair dripping onto my desk. My teacher, Mr. Calloway, just sighed. The whole class burst into laughter. "Would you like to explain why you're late?" he asked, rubbing his temples. I pushed my wet strands behind my ear. Fashion emergency. From that day on, I wasn't just Samantha. I was Blue Sam. So, which of these insane late-to-class excuses shocked you the most? Or better yet, have you ever been late for a reason so unbelievable that no one believed you? Drop your wildest stories in the comments. And if you love hearing crazy real-life tales like these, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. This is Reddit True Vault, and we'll see you in the next story.